My name is Derek Mosley. I'm the director of Marquette Law School's Lubar Center, and I want to welcome you to our Get to Know program. As many of you know, April 1st, there's an election here in Wisconsin for the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and we have invited both candidates for that position to come in for a Get to Know. As someone who has run in a spring election as a judge, I know that most of the electorate is not that familiar with the judges, and so I wanted to throw something where you get to listen and ask questions and get to know a little bit more about the candidates running for the position. I'm excited for today. We are joined by Judge Susan Crawford. If you can give her a round of applause, please. So Susan, I just want to start from the beginning.
Yeah.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Chippewa Falls, western Wisconsin. Great community, and any Chippewa people here? No Chippewa people here, come on.
I've been in the brewery.
Yes.
Does that count? Okay.
Galini's Lodge, yes.
Yeah. And did you do your undergrad in the state of Wisconsin?
I did. I went to Lawrence University in Appleton.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's some Lawrence
All
people in the
right,
house.
let's hear it. Yes.
All right, and then why law school?
Yeah, you know, it took me kind of a winding path to get to law school. So when I was growing up in Chippewa Falls, I wanted to be a teacher when I grew up. My teachers were my heroes. And then, you know, when I went to college, I, you know, changed course a little bit and decided I wanted to be a college-level teacher. So I ended up going to graduate school immediately after Lawrence at Indiana University in English literature. Spent a couple of semesters there and then just started feeling like, you know, it wasn't quite the right fit for me and that I wanted to be more involved in solving some of the problems that I saw in our communities and just helping people more directly. And so I finished a master's degree at Indiana and then took a little bit of time off to reassess and figure out the kind of best route to doing those kinds of things that I felt like I wanted to do and ended up in law school.
And law school took you to the state of Iowa.
It did,
Yeah.
yes.
And you went to the University of Iowa for law school.
That's right. Yeah.
And while you were at law school, was there any classes or any activities that you took part in that you really enjoyed?
Yeah, well, you know, outside of the sort of standard law school curriculum that I'm sure all the law students here are very familiar with, you know, the property and the contracts and common law and all those classes, I took a lot of elective courses in human rights and international law. There was just a pretty robust selection of courses at Iowa in those topics, and I ended up being the editor-in-chief of the International Law Journal while I was there, which really was the equivalent of a full-time job. You know, it was a lot of work editing that journal, but that's something that was kind of a passion project for me and really an interesting experience.
And so you graduated from the University of Iowa
Yeah.
Law School, and then what was your first job out of law school?
Yeah, my first job out of law school was at the Iowa Attorney General's office, so that took me to Des Moines. I knew at that point that I really wanted to ultimately get back to the state of Wisconsin, my home state, but it was a great opportunity, and I started out handling criminal appeals as a prosecutor there and had great opportunities to argue in front of the Iowa Supreme Court. I think I argued a dozen cases in a pretty short time there. And then my next move was to the Wisconsin Department of Justice, again, prosecuting criminal appeals in front of both the Wisconsin Supreme Court and the Wisconsin Court of Appeals.
Why'd you leave Iowa?
Well, I wanted to get back home to Wisconsin. You know, I knew that even when I took that initial job in Iowa, that was probably going to be a stepping stone, a way for me to get some great experience and, you know, develop some work history, some experience, which is really important as a young lawyer. And so I started looking for another opportunity a couple years after I'd started there, and I was fortunate that the Wisconsin Department of Justice was recruiting for lawyers to fill a number of positions, and I was hired by then Attorney General Jim Doyle in 1997 and moved back to Wisconsin with my now husband, and you know, that's where we've been ever since. Raised our kids in Madison and have really had a great career there.
So in the DOJ, Wisconsin DOJ, what kind of cases did you handle there?
Yeah, you know, I mostly handled felony cases on appeal, so prosecuting cases in the Wisconsin Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court. So I argued criminal cases in front of the Wisconsin Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals. Ultimately, I was director of criminal appeals for the state at the Department of Justice. It's the largest legal unit at the Wisconsin Department of Justice. So my role was making sure that the prosecutors in the Department of Justice were taking consistent positions because in appeals, unlike in the trial courts, those decisions establish precedent, as the law students in here understand. So we had to really be careful in making sure that we were taking consistent positions in arguing the law. I also did trial level work for a period of time, prosecuting healthcare fraud and patient abuse cases in trial courts around the state.
How long were you in the DOJ?
I was there, I started in 1997, and then after then Attorney General Jim Doyle was elected governor, and he went on to take that office in 2003. I left the Department of Justice to take an appointed position in his administration.
And what position was that?
Well, initially I was the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Employment Relations, which was the agency that was then responsible for overseeing the state civil service system, for negotiating labor contracts with all of the collective bargaining units that represented state employees, and just generally overseeing state employment. But I moved around a lot in state government when Governor Doyle was the governor. He just kept finding different spots for me, said, Susan, do you want to move over there and take on this different opportunity? And I always, throughout my career, I've always wanted to be where I could do the most good, where I could be the most helpful. So, I was always said, yes, sir, I will take on this new challenge. So I ended up at the Department of Corrections for a while. I was the chief of staff for the secretary there. Ended up after that at the Wisconsin DNR, where I was head of the Division of Enforcement, critical role in making sure our environmental laws are enforced appropriately. And then I ended up in the governor's office and was chief legal counsel to the governor's office for the last couple of years that he was in office.
So just to explain, what does the chief legal counsel do for the governor?
It is a job that almost defies description, Darren. Every day is different. Sort of broadly, it is to give legal advice to staff in the governor's office, to the governor, just making sure that the office is following the law. But more broadly, I was constantly in contact with attorneys at all the state agencies. I also had some very specific duties around drafting executive orders, making sure that bills were signed, just a little kind of fun niche area of that job. You know how when you're driving around town, you'll notice a flag is at half-mast, half-staff? That's always because the governor has issued an executive order. So that was part of my job at that time, is making sure that we issued executive orders on the flags. But just extremely varied, and generally making sure that across state government we were applying the laws fairly and equally to protect Wisconsinites.
And you actually left that office and went into
Yes.
private practice.
Right, yep.
How'd that happen?
Well, Governor Doyle finished his second term, decided not to run for re-election, so the governor's office changed hands, and I decided to take that opportunity to change my path, and I ended up at a law firm in Madison and began a new phase of my career as a civil litigator. So I was representing every wide range of clients, everything from individuals to businesses, families, labor unions, including public school teachers. I represented the League of Women Voters in some litigation, government officials, pretty broad practice throughout the state, and handled some pretty high-profile cases involving, issues of a pretty broad public interest. For example, I was involved in some of the initial litigation involving Act 10 on behalf of public school teachers.
Act 10 being the law that limited public sector employees' right to collectively bargain.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
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 And so you're part of that?
Yeah, I was part of that, and that was, there was a lot of litigation by a lot of different organizations over that law that took place over a number of years, and I also represented Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin and their doctors, and successfully litigated cases in which the legislature had restricted their ability to provide health care services to women, threatening them with felony prosecutions or the loss of their medical license for doing it. And we were successful and got those laws overturned in the courts.
And how long did you do that work?
I did that work for about 7.5 years, Derek. And then in 2018, I ran for judge in Dane County.
So how we get that?
Getting ahead of you.
You're jumping a little fast.
Getting ahead of you.
So what was the decision that made you decide that you wanted to run for judge?
Well, I really loved being a civil litigator. Standing up in the courtroom and fighting for my clients was just something that I was passionate about. I think having that opportunity to advocate for people's constitutional rights and their rights under Wisconsin law was something I really enjoyed. But often we would be successful in the circuit courts, get protections for our clients, and then end up in front of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. The other side appealed, and we ended up in front of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And at that time, the court had a very conservative majority and often was hostile to my clients. I argued cases in front of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, civil cases at that time, where the court didn't like some members, not everybody, but certain members of the court didn't like the fact that my client was a labor union because they didn't like labor unions. So that was very frustrating for me, and sometimes they would ask questions that I felt were inappropriate and really not based on the law, but were based on political considerations. So I decided I wanted to kind of do something about that, and getting into the judiciary was the path I decided to take.
And so you had a contested election?
I did, yes.
And
yes.
Won the election?
I did. Yes.
And your first assignment on the bench?
I started out in the criminal division. So Dane County, unlike Milwaukee County, Milwaukee's a little different. We have 3 broad divisions. It's criminal, civil, and juvenile. And I've spent some time in each of those areas now. But I started out in criminal.
What about the circuit court bench do you enjoy?
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to apply our laws to protect the rights of Wisconsinites. And my approach to judicial decision-making is, I think, pretty straightforward. I make sure that I, first of all, get the facts right. The truth is a really important consideration in our justice system, so I always am looking for the truth. Then I make sure that, after I've listened to the attorneys or the parties make their arguments to me about how they believe the law should be applied, I try to apply the laws fairly and impartially and reach a decision that applies some common sense and takes into account that these are real people with real problems in front of me. And, I consider myself, my judicial philosophy is pragmatism, making sure that we are applying the laws the way they're intended, which is to protect the rights of the people of our state.
All right. Before I go into the move now to the Supreme Court,
Yeah.
What do you like to do for fun?
What is fun again? Right now, fun for me is barnstorming around the state, talking to voters. We try to sneak in a visit to like an ice cream shop when we can, which is great. No, I actually really enjoy campaigning. But when I'm not quite as busy as I am now, I have a yellow lab who I love very much, and I like taking her on walks in the woods and things like that. I enjoy staying fit and exercising. I have a pretty demanding, workout schedule when I'm not campaigning, not doing a lot of that. I really enjoy reading. I love to cook. I like to bake. I'm a sourdough baker, kind of a little niche baking.
Did you pick that up over COVID?
I actually, before COVID,
okay, all right.
I was doing it before COVID. But I also like to draw and paint. I have a little artistic bent and enjoy, dabbling a little bit in arts and crafts as well. So I, lots of different things.
Are you involved in any activities on any boards?
Oh yes, So I have. I've always looked for, opportunities to do volunteer work, just to, give back to my community. So when I have two kids who are now young adults, but when they were young, I was the PTO president at my elementary school for a couple of years, really involved in their educations. Now I am on the board. I was chair until I started getting too busy with the campaign, but chair of the board of a food pantry in Dane County, the largest food pantry in Dane County. It's called The River. And that's, I volunteer there as well when I have time. And it's just wonderful work to be able to be involved in a service like that provides, that kind of hands-on service to people, fundamental. People need food to survive. And so many times when I'm in the courtroom, the people in front of me are living in poverty, especially when I was on the juvenile bench, this was the case, families in crisis, kids, who are, being neglected by their parents, often because the parents are, have many, many challenges in front of them. So to be able to participate in, direct service organization like The River has been just really rewarding to me.
Now, you and I met, we were on a panel together at
Yeah.
a judicial conference
Yes.
teaching. And do you still teach? I mean, let's take the campaign out of it.
Yeah.
Did you teach prior to the campaign?
I have been very involved in judicial education in the state since I became a judge. And some of, it's, I don't think, widely known to everybody that the state Supreme Court, in addition to deciding cases, which is kind of the most visible part of their role, they also run the state court system. So they operate an office of state courts, and that office has a number of different committees that they solicit judges to volunteer to spend time giving back to the state court system and helping to advance the interests of the justice system, such as the Judicial Education Committee. And I served on that committee for many years. I actually just term limited out of it at the beginning of this year.
Lucky
but
you.
It was good timing. But I was involved in helping to plan many different judicial education seminars, and I co-chaired several seminars to, again, this is just to make sure that judges are up to date on the law and have opportunities to learn about new areas.
So how long have you been on the circuit court bench?
Since 2018.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now I'll go to it.
Yeah.
What
Why
made you
now?
make the decision to run for Supreme
Yeah.
Court now?
I alluded to it just a few minutes ago when I said that I've always looked for the opportunities in my career to do the most good and to use my experience and, the skills that I've gained over the course of a long career to, have the most reach. And right now, as a circuit court judge, I'm delivering justice on it's a very case-by-case level. It's very granular. It's the parties in front of me being able to make decisions that protect their rights. And the opportunity to serve on the Wisconsin Supreme Court is, really extends the scope of that ability to do justice statewide because the decisions that the Supreme Court issues establish precedent and establish the law for the whole state. And the Supreme Court of Wisconsin only takes up cases that involve issues of statewide importance. That's sort of by definition. That is why they take cases up. And they can take cases in every part of the law. And I have such broad experience going from criminal prosecution to all the administrative work that I did, and now on this private practice covering many different areas of law, and now as a judge, that I felt like all of that experience could be put to really good use on the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
So let me ask you this. You mentioned it briefly. I just want to make sure I catch it again. But your judicial philosophy.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I'm a pragmatist. And that means that I pay really close attention to the context of the decision that I'm making. I don't look at legal decisions as abstract principles. Really important to focus on why the parties are in my courtroom. What brought them there? What's the nature of this dispute? And what kind of problems are they trying to solve here? And then looking at the law, how should the law be applied to this particular dispute in a way that serves the purposes that the law is there for. So on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, an additional kind of dimension of that is to consider how those decisions are going to be applied in future cases. Because again, that's precedent. Those decisions are going to be applied throughout all the state courts in Wisconsin in different contexts. So part of what you need to do, in my view, is to try to look ahead and consider how those cases are going to impact future parties in the state, different contexts in which the decisions are going to arise and be applied. So, it's a really people-centered approach.
What role do you believe someone's personal values should play when it comes to making judicial decisions?
Yeah, well, to me, it's more a matter of experience. And I have, as I said, I have broad experience in many different areas of the law. And I have the personal experience of standing up in the courtroom, fighting for my clients and fighting for their rights. And that gives me the perspective behind behind the bar of how the decisions that are issued by a court are going to be, how they're going to impact the parties in front of me. So, I think it's important for voters to understand what kind of experience I bring to the race. I think personal values are important, just so that, people can understand things like, I believe that our Constitution should protect a zone of private decision-making, self-determination, however you want to call it, but that there should be certain areas where people are free to make their own decisions about their lives, their relationships, their health care, without the government getting involved. That's something I think voters should know about me.
What aspect of your legal career do you think prepares you to become a Supreme Court Justice?
I don't think it is any one thing. I think it's probably the body of experience that I bring to the job. And in particular, I have really deep experience in the kind of cases. So appeals are what go to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And I have argued in front of the Wisconsin Supreme Court a number of times, both in criminal cases and in civil cases. As I said, early in my career, I had the opportunity to argue in front of another state Supreme Court, the Iowa Supreme Court. Also have been in front of the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. So that's, frankly, kind of unusual for a candidate for the Wisconsin Supreme Court to bring all of that deep experience in the very work that the Wisconsin Supreme Court does. So I'm really proud of my record of having done that kind of work, and I think it makes me exceptionally qualified. And then obviously, having spent a number of years on the bench and covering all the different kind of cases that come through the circuit court makes me, just familiar with the kinds of cases that end up in front of the Wisconsin Supreme Court as well.
I didn't ask you, what assignment did you enjoy the most on the circuit court bench?
Yeah. I think the most meaningful to me was the work that I did in the juvenile division. So those are cases that involve kids and families. They involve both delinquency cases, so kids, do something that gets themselves in trouble, they have to end up in court, and cases that are called child in need of protection or services cases, or CHIPS cases. Unfortunately, often termination of parental rights cases, which are the most difficult cases that I ever, had to adjudicate, just because of the nature of the decision that you're making in those kind of cases. But to me, the best days that I had in court were cases where I had, presided over a case involving a child or children who had been separated from their parents because their parents were going through some struggles. Might be addiction to drugs or alcohol, or some mental health struggles. And through the court process, they had received services. And the best days in court were when I could reunite a child with their parents after the parents had received some help and some services to help them overcome those challenges.
So we live in a pretty politically charged environment right now. I think that's putting it lightly.
Yeah.
But how do you maintain your impartiality on the bench in times like this?
Yeah. Well, I think it is really important to keep an open mind in any decision. So as a judge, I am really careful to make sure that when I approach a case, that I am not making any decision until I have heard all the evidence, seen the arguments from the lawyers, and typically done some of my own research on the law, and only then will I come to a final decision in a case. That's what I would do on the Wisconsin Supreme Court as well. And if I felt that there were a particular case where I could not be impartial and had some kind of either a conflict of interest or felt that I had some personal stake or bias, I would not sit on the case. I think that is a basis to recuse. So you just have to, as a judge, you learn to kind of check yourself and make sure that you're able to make fair and impartial decisions. And I've had occasion as a circuit court judge where I looked at a case and I was like, I know this person, I know one of the parties, and have to think that through, and I've decided to take myself off cases just because I didn't want to have any kind of bias or favoritism playing any kind of a role. And that applies to politics as well. If there was something that I felt like I had such a strong feeling about on a policy or political basis, I would not hesitate to take myself off a case if it meant that I was not able to be fair and impartial.
So you've been on the bench for a while enough to probably make this determination. So what is your current view of the judiciary? What are some problems? What are we doing right?
Yeah. Well, I think overall Wisconsin has a really strong judiciary. And I, through the work that I have done on the statewide court committees, judicial education, I served for over a year on a committee related to the shortage of court reporters in our system. I've helped plan the annual judicial conferences and just done a lot of, and that's all volunteer work, that's all extra stuff that I've done. But through that work, I've had opportunities to work with other judges from all over the state. And, we don't ask each other, are you a Democrat or a Republican? Are you conservative? Are you liberal? We just get to work and solve problems or put on the programs that are needed to educate judges. And I have really appreciated the amount of hard work that most judges put into their jobs. I think judges by and large really just want to get it right and do justice in their courtrooms. So I think from that angle that our judiciary in Wisconsin is very strong, and it gets a lot of support from the state court system, the Office of State Courts, that allows it to continue to build on that strength. I think some of the challenges that we face is that there are not enough legal resources available to all the parties that appear in our courtrooms. So we have a lot of cases, I see them every day, where people are in court without a lawyer because they can't afford one. And there simply are not enough affordable resources for people who are, in cases that are really high stakes and are complicated. So something like a mortgage foreclosure action, somebody's going to lose their home, or an eviction, or a family court matter where, their custody of their children might be at stake. Those are all areas that are civil cases, and there is no constitutional right to get a lawyer appointed to represent you in those cases. But there are organizations like the Legal Aid Society, for example, that provide a lot of great work to defend people who are in those situations, but there's just not enough of it. So I have cases in front of me every day where I've got somebody sitting at that table without a lawyer, and I do my best to help them understand the courtroom procedures and what they, things like they come with a pile of documents, sort of what the process is for getting those into evidence, but I can't give them legal advice. I can't advocate for them in the way that a lawyer would. So, I do wish that there were more opportunities for people to get affordable legal services.
Would that be something you'd advocate for on the Supreme Court?
I think broadly, yes. And it is something that is, it's really a policy choice. It's something that the legislature could address by providing more funding for organizations that provide those kinds of low-cost legal services to people. But I think it is one of those areas that it's appropriate for judges and justices to support and advocate for. Because there are some limits under our judicial code for judges. We're not supposed to get involved in policy decisions and policy making unless it directly involves the courts, and then it's okay. So that's an area where it does directly involve the courts.
So if you weren't a lawyer and a judge,
Yeah,
what would you be doing?
I think I'd be a teacher. Yeah.
What grade?
Oh, let's see. I actually really enjoy really young kids. They have a lot of energy, though. So I think either really young kids or college students. And, not the 13-year-olds, not so much a big fan of the middle school age group. But I think either really young kids or kids after they've settled out a little bit and are, ready to learn.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's all of my questions, and I want to open it up so that everybody here has an opportunity to ask questions. We'll come around with the microphone.
I'm going to start back here, but please make sure I see your hands as you're trying to ask questions.
And I'll point out too, Hill.
Yeah.
What is or will be the role of the Wisconsin Supreme Court with all the, let's call it the turmoil in Washington and the federal court cases?
Yeah. Well, I think that we've all seen and read about different organizations bringing legal challenges to the federal courts on some of the executive orders that President Trump has issued in the sort of opening weeks of his administration. And those are properly brought in federal courts. It really is going to be up to parties and lawyers in Wisconsin to decide if there's a role for the state court to play in protecting the rights of Wisconsinites. And the courts, unlike the other branches of government, are more reactive than proactive. So in other words, they don't go out looking for issues to be brought to the court. The lawyers and the parties have to bring the issues to the courts. So, I think that is a great question to ask the state bar, a big group of lawyers, to what they would think might be some different legal cases that could be brought to our state courts. That's about as well as I can do with that answer. Thank you.
I want to make sure I understood what you said.
Yeah.
You talked about advocating or fighting about Act 10. You talked about the fight over Act 10 and how you were part of some groups that were opposing it, I believe.
Yes.
Would you have to recuse yourself on those cases if it came to the state Supreme Court?
Thanks. That's a good question, and I get that question pretty frequently. Because there is another case involving Act 10 that's working its way through the appeals courts right now. Act 10, most people think of it as like kind of one monolithic thing, but it was actually a 50-page long bill that changed many different parts of the Wisconsin statutes. And so for a new case involving some part of Act 10 or some legal challenge to it, the approach I would take is, first of all, look at the parties who are bringing that challenge, look at the specific legal issue that they're raising, and what provision in Act 10 are they addressing or trying to get overturned. If it was the exact provisions that I was involved in challenging as a lawyer and a similar type of legal challenge, I think I probably would recuse myself. But as I said, it's a 50-page long law, and my understanding of the legal challenge that is moving its way through the courts right now involves different provisions than the ones that I was involved in challenging back in 2012. I still would, I still would go through the process, though, of like making a close analysis and examination of that case, because I don't know a lot about it. I know what I've read in the news media about that case and haven't delved into, the filings of the parties and all that. Thanks for that question, though.
Thank you so much for coming in. I'm wondering what your response is to the backlash about donations to your campaign from Soros and Pritzker, specifically amidst also backlash of donations to Schimmel's campaign from Elon Musk.
Yeah. Well, one of the reactions that I had when I heard that Elon Musk is now, putting millions of dollars into the campaign on behalf of my opponent was, gee, when I was a kid growing up in Chippewa Falls, I never thought I would be, fighting against the world's richest man for justice in Wisconsin, but here we are. So, I think it's concerning that Elon Musk has entered the race, given that he is, kind of this unelected right-hand person to the president, is seemingly working to dismantle the federal government right now, and is openly saying that he wants Brad Schimmel on the Wisconsin Supreme Court to advance the Trump agenda. That's not why we have a Wisconsin Supreme Court. I have always made it really clear to anyone who's interested in supporting me that I'm running to be a fair and impartial justice on the Supreme Court. I am not running to bring any kind of a political or partisan agenda to the Supreme Court. And if you're in agreement with that and that's what you want to, then I welcome your support. But I make no promises to anybody. Unlike my opponent, I do not state how I would decide any of the cases that are pending before the Wisconsin Supreme Court or likely to end up there. I think it's really important for judges to follow the judicial code, which says that judges should not comment on pending cases because it's prejudicial to the parties in those cases to do so. Unfortunately, as I said, Brad Schimmel has, depending on the audience that he's in front of, has made comments about, for example, the 1849 abortion law that is awaiting a decision before the Supreme Court. He has openly said he thinks there's nothing wrong with that law. I have refrained from any comment on that case because it's a pending case. So, I think there's a striking difference between Elon Musk getting involved in the race and doing so because he believes that the candidate of his choosing will help him to press a partisan agenda in the court, and the support I'm receiving, which is very broad-based. We've had contributions from literally tens of thousands of both Wisconsinites, some people outside of the state that are interested in the race and interested in seeing what happens with the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Thank you.
Hello. You talk a lot about advancing justice.
Yeah.
I'm very curious, what does justice mean to you?
Yeah.
And how will you know if you're implementing a fair and justice agenda?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it is you have to start with the facts and then the law, right? So getting the facts right and making sure that you know what the truth of the matter is by closely examining the evidence that the parties have brought to court. I think that's just a critical starting point for any judicial decision. And then applying the law fairly and impartially. And as I said, really looking at the purposes of the law. I view the laws as, tools to protect people's rights. So oftentimes, you'll hear the phrase originalism or the word originalism be bandied about. And sometimes some people have a very, very expansive view of what that word means. But to me, it's a starting point for the analysis. Whether you're looking at a constitutional provision or a statutory provision, you look at what was going on. Why was this enacted? Why was this passed? What was the purpose? And then from there, you look at precedent to see how that law has been applied and interpreted to different types of legal disputes. And that gives you a much deeper understanding of what what the law is there to accomplish. And, it's gets a little bit more fine-grained than that when you're talking about applying precedent. But ultimately, I try to apply the laws to, the true facts of a case in a way that serves the purposes of the law and, bottom line, protects the rights of the parties in front of me. Thank you. It's hard to explain without getting into like a more specific case example, but that's my broad approach. Thank you.
Hi. This is sort of a psychological question related to impartiality and bias. Can you hear me? Thank you. Psychological question related to bias,
Yeah.
impartiality, that you're talking about trying to do a fair check for yourself.
Yes.
To say that you're, research suggests that there's many subconscious factors that go into our making decisions. We're often very wrong. We don't realize we're wrong. When we are wrong, we often deny that we are wrong. What mental processes do you use to say, I got to recheck this now. I got to think this through.
I love that question. That's a great question, and it's a great one given that I'm sitting next to Derek Mosley here, who does so much work with our state court system, with our judges, and with other organizations, legal and otherwise, on implicit bias, because I think that's what you're talking about. We all have biases that are unconscious, that are just part of the lens through which we view the world. And the more we can learn about and understand how those biases operate, the better job we can do in making sure that they're not prejudicing our decision making. So I have attended a lot of trainings, including ones with Derek Mosley and other presenters in our Wisconsin state court system on, just closely examining the personal biases that I or anyone else bring to our decisions. And that's some of that's just your life experiences and the culture that we live in, but it's hard work too. I think that you really have to put a lot of thought into your decision making. And again, that's why I don't make snap judgments. I do not make decisions based on what I read in the media or what I read in the papers. I really try to keep an open mind until the full case is presented to me. And I've experienced this on the circuit court bench where I'll have a case and I take a quick look at the pleadings in the case and think like, I think this is going to go that way, but let's just wait and see. And then after I've heard all the evidence and the arguments, it goes the other way, because you can't trust those knee-jerk opinions that you first raise or first occur to you. You really have to keep an open mind. So that's what I strive to do.
Does your campaign use yard signs? And if so, where might somebody? You can hear me.
I can hear him.
Want to acquire one?
Yard signs. We love them. There are yard signs available. I see a couple of, does anybody know where we can get them locally? Bayview. Can you speak right? Can you give him a mic? He's answering the question for me.
Bayview on Delaware Avenue, where Delaware Avenue meets Pennsylvania Avenue. That's the Democratic Party headquarters. They have lots of signs.
There you go.
They're open, I think, 8 a.m. to noon, 5 days a week.
Actually, longer than noon, till 5. I was just
all day. All right. Thank you.
Hi, Judge Crawford.
Hi.
There have been commercials that have basically cherry-picked some of your cases and the sentences that you had.
Yeah.
That make me extremely uncomfortable as a former prosecutor because they don't tell the general public what goes into what you do in sentencing.
Right.
Are you going to, I'd like you to address it to this audience, but are you going to address in your commercials those attack ads that are wildly going after specific cases without giving people any facts?
Right. Well, thank you for raising that. And, the struggle is that with a TV ad, you get 30 seconds. So can we do justice to those cases in 30 seconds? No, unfortunately, we can't. So, we're going to be pushing back against those, false narratives in those ads. And, I stand by the decisions that I've made. I made those decisions applying the law, which says that judges have to consider all of the relevant factors in making a sentencing decision. And I think it's somewhat ironic that the cases they have cherry-picked, which is 2 primarily, are cases where I sentenced people to several years in prison, followed by several years of extended supervision, sex offender supervision, when it's one of those kinds of cases, which is quite strict, and have required people to be lifetime registrants on the sex offender registry. It is not going to be possible for me to lay out the full story in those cases in a 30-second TV ad. We will be broadly just pointing out that those ads are not true, and that I always put public safety and the protection of the victims first when I am making any decision, and particularly in those criminal cases. It is a shame that organizations like the Elon Musk organization can put these things out there into a public forum literally without them knowing anything about me, to the point that they use the picture of somebody else in one of their ads, a different Susan Crawford than myself in one of those ads. So it is, it's just part of the challenge of running a campaign in this very divisive political environment that we're in. There are going to be these outside groups coming in. The Schimmel campaign itself is running similar kinds of ads, and we got to just fight back and point out some of the decisions that Judge Schimmel has made, where he has quite a history of sentencing people who committed, violent crimes of domestic violence and child abuse, and given sentences that involve no jail time at all or short stints in jail, and then those offenders have gone on to reoffend and committed new crimes. The couple of cases that they're highlighting from my record, those people have not committed new crimes, which is really the test of the adequacy of the sentence. Did it serve its purpose of protecting the community? So, part of it is fighting fire with fire and pointing out my opponent's record. Thank you.
Hi, this is actually almost a prefatory question to the previous one, which is, I'm sure that before you entered this race, you knew you were going to deal with a certain amount of unkindness and almost statewide. And as a judge, I'm sure you're used to dissatisfaction with some of the things that you do. But is there anything for your mental health and your family's mental health that you did to prepare for the level of unkindness that you knew you were going to experience and are experiencing now?
Well, thank you for that very sympathetic question. This recalls to me an email exchange I had with my mother recently. And my parents are still with us, thank God. And, my mom kept emailing me about, I saw this ad and I saw that ad, and, it's very upsetting to her. And I eventually said, Mom, you're going to have to turn off the TV or only watch PBS because they don't have those ads. She's like, we watch a lot of PBS. That's a good idea. So, some of it is just, for myself personally and for my family, just limiting our exposure. I don't go out looking at all the Facebook comments or the tweets or any of that junk because it doesn't help me do my job as a candidate. I need to, keep my head on straight and keep my head high and just continue to tell people like all of you here why I'm in this race, what kind of experience I bring to it, and why I think I'd be a good justice on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And some of it is just tuning out the noise. That and getting enough sleep.
So thank you again for coming. I think this is the best way to learn about candidates. So it's awesome that you're here. The next 10 years, right, are potentially going to be the craziest of any government ever, especially for Supreme Court justices. And I think there'll be great triumphs and huge hurdles. And I'm just curious what you think what are you most excited for, whether it be personally, professionally, and what are you most worried about?
It's a great question. Yeah, that is a really good question. That's a hard one to tackle. I think that it is, and I don't want to like oversimplify my answer, but it's that opportunity to make sure that that the Wisconsin Supreme Court is upholding and protecting the rights of all Wisconsinites under our laws and our Constitution. And the cases that end up in the Wisconsin Supreme Court are, it's a huge range of stuff. It's everything from criminal cases, environmental cases, cases involving voting and election law, property taxes, you name it. It's just a whole wide variety of issues. I think that we have seen the Wisconsin Supreme Court being a little bit caught in the crosshairs in the last several years because we have very divided government in Wisconsin. We have a governor who's a Democrat and both houses in the legislature dominated by Republicans, and they come into pretty sharp conflict very often. And that ends up being in front of the Wisconsin Supreme Court as the final arbiter when there are disagreements oftentimes. I don't see that stopping immediately, and everything that we're seeing in all the churn and all of the sudden movements that we're seeing out of Washington, D.C. might likewise impact the kinds of cases that we see in front of the Wisconsin Supreme Court in future years. But I think it's important to have a Wisconsin Supreme Court that is steady and is looking to adjudicate those disputes as they come before them based on the law, interpreting our laws and our Constitution to protect the rights of people in the state of Wisconsin. And I hope that I end up on the Wisconsin Supreme Court and can be part of that, steady rock for the state of Wisconsin as we deal with a lot of political turbulence. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So there has been a lot of activity in college campuses and schools regarding DEI, especially after Trump's executive order on DEI.
Yes.
I was kind of wondering how you plan to maintain diversity and inclusivity in Wisconsin colleges and schools in general.
Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, that's not a question I can answer directly because that is a question of policy. And there may be cases in front of the Wisconsin Supreme Court that involve disputes about DEI programs in the colleges and universities across the state, or efforts to end such programs and legal challenges related to those issues. So all I can say is that if those issues come before me when I am on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, I will be looking closely at the evidence in those cases and the legal issues and considering the legal arguments presented by the parties. And on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, I think it's also important that each justice listens to the perspectives of the other justices on the court. It's a body of 7 justices. It's not like it is for me as a circuit court judge where it really is just up to me. So making sure that I hear out my colleagues and then come to a decision that I believe the law or the Constitution requires in that case to, protect the rights of the citizens. And that's about the best I can do in answering that. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for coming. I've heard a lot on campus about this email that's been circulating. I'm sure you've heard about it, but I haven't been able to find anything online about your campaign's response to it in regards to your participation in some type of forum about a chance to put 2 more House seats into play in 2026.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how you respond to that.
Yeah, thanks for that opportunity. So there is a group called, I believe, Focus on Democracy. Has a lot of, it's just kind of a loose group of people who focus on democracy. And they invited me to appear by Zoom at one of their meetings to discuss the race and my candidacy. and which I did. I participated in this Zoom meeting briefly, introduced myself, gave an overview of my candidacy. I did not talk at all about the congressional maps in Wisconsin. I did not receive any questions about them, and the topic just did not come up in my brief appearance in that group. And then I excused myself, and I don't know what was on the rest of the agenda for that group's meeting that day, the rest of the Zoom. Unfortunately, they did circulate an email inviting their members to participate in that Zoom because they are looking down the road at perhaps some legal challenge to bring. There isn't currently any legal challenge to the congressional maps in Wisconsin. And in fact, just a year ago, when the Supreme Court took up a challenge to the state legislative maps, I believe they declined to take up a challenge to the congressional maps. So I think it was an unfortunate choice of wording in that email that went out, but I have never taken any position, either publicly or privately, on those congressional maps, and I literally don't have one because I just don't even know much about how the maps came to be or what some legal challenge might be to them. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank you. It's wonderful that you're here. Thank you, Judge Mosley, for having her.
And Hillary.
Yes, okay. And this is so impressive just listening to you. Oh, my gosh. I also want to know, when are you going to have the debate?
March 12th. March 12th.
Right here? Yeah, we're hosting the debate.
Are we allowed to come?
Sure. Yeah, well, we don't know. I don't know. Are you allowed to come? I don't know.
No, I mean, is it open like this? Is it?
Right now, it is not.
Oh, it's
right
not
now
open.
It's not. No.
Okay. Okay. March. What is it? March 12th. I gotta put that down. At what time?
In the evening sometime.
Yeah, it's in the evening.
Yeah.
Oh, 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
It will be on Channel 12.
Yeah.
Oh, the Channel 12. Or take that.
Do we have time for one more?
One more question.
Hi, Judge Crawford.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being here. I just wanted to ask about some of your main campaign principles. Listed on your website are fair, impartial, and common sense.
Yeah.
And you've spoken quite a bit about fairness and impartiality, but can you kind of describe how you define common sense in the context of a state Supreme Court justice?
Sure.
And maybe why this is such an important action right now in the current political environment where maybe some common sense is no longer common?
Yeah. Thanks for that. You know, I use common sense when I'm talking to broad general audiences. Today I use the term pragmatism. I think it means the same thing. Pragmatism is a little fancier word in front of an audience like this. It means that I'm really closely examining what my legal decision is going to do and how it's going to affect the parties in front of me, and not making decisions, as I said, not making decisions that treating my decisions as abstract principles, but really looking at what is the impact going to be on the parties in front of me.
So we're getting to time, but I just wanted to say this much. The reason why I wanted to throw this type of event with not only Susan, but with Brad as well, is because I've been in this position running for a seat as a judge, and knowing that the people who are signing my papers or the people who are going to vote had no idea who I was. And I wanted to make sure that we brought the candidates in because the Supreme Court is the authority of the law here in the state of Wisconsin. So I want to thank you for being here and being a part of this forum. And if we can give her a round of applause.